Chag Sameach. Sameach. One day, when my daughter Shalva was maybe 3.5, 4 years old, she was being a little bit wild, and I said to her, "Shalva, why are you being so wild?" She said, "Abba, my mind is telling me not to be wild, but my body just wants to be wild." And I thought, wow, some good awareness there. But I also thought, well, this is the journey, isn't it? There's a part of us, our inner voice, our true self, that wants us to do what we really want to do, but then we have all these obstacles in the way. And so what is that inner voice, that true voice? It's that voice that wants us to live by our dreams, to be the person we know we can be, of being strong and being courageous in all those places where we need to be courageous, that doesn't change living by our highest aspirations because of other people's thoughts or expectations, and that knows how to respond to challenges with wisdom and foresight, and that knows how to just be in the moment, to live with purpose and joy and peace, just be our true self, be who we are in our heart of hearts. And so what is it that gets in the way? All those obstacles? Well, it's all the habits, the narrownesses, the fears that make us feel like we can't just enjoy life. We feel out of sorts, we feel sad, we feel not present because they get in the way of us just being. And they lead us down those roads, or we said we'd never go back again, and they stop us from living, just being in the current of life, enjoying the blessings of being with the people we love, and the blessings and gifts we all have in our lives. And so this battle, this is the freedom of being our true selves, is maybe in one sense the most universal of all the freedoms that we think about during this holiday, of how we can overcome those barriers that just stop us from being who we want to be. And in some ways, this reading today of the Red Sea is a reading that really speaks to this battle within human beings in a very striking way. Because the moment that they hear the Egyptians are coming, the people who'd been enjoying the feeling of freedom, they'd left Egypt, everything was great, suddenly they panic, and for the first time, what's going to happen over and over and over in their journeys through the desert starts to happen, where they suddenly lose it all their freedom, all their higher self, and suddenly they're starting to complain and wish they had never left Egypt and all those things that we read about. And this really is the battle of the whole time crossing the desert for 40 years over and over. And on one hand, they came in and they were holding on to what happened before, all the wonders that God had done for them. They'd learned a new name for God, the Eheye, I will be, I am. And they were reminded of who they were, that they came from the patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and had witnessed their very God humble the Pharaoh and the mightiest empire. And God had given them a new purpose to leave Egypt, and they'd seen their enemies defeated, and so they felt free. And they'd play their part too. They had the sandals on their feet on Seder night, and the staves on their hands, and they'd follow the instructions to avoid the angel of death, the Malach Mavet. And it all continued. Everything was great as they were traveling through the sea, holding on to this new beginning, a new sense of connection to where they were coming from and who they were. But it didn't take long for that to just disappear into thin air. The moment they saw the Egyptians coming, all their old enemies, suddenly the inner obstacles were all awoken, and they had the chutzpah to go to Moses and say, "Take us back to Egypt. Was it for want of graves in Egypt? He took us here after everything they'd been through." Moses told them to be quiet, and that they had to just overcome all their fears and narrowness that was stopping them. And so Moses becomes a voice for them, and maybe as we read it in the future, of the voice telling them not to give in to their fears, not to give in to all of it, but to always keep going forward and to trust and have faith. And so God says to Moses, "Don't pray to me, but let them go in. speak to the children of Israel that they should go forward. That's what they needed to do. And as mentioned, the Midrash says that Nachshon walked in and the waters parted. And it's interesting when we watch this battle throughout all their travels, how more and more God expects them to do the heavy lifting. Because here all they had to do is really take a few steps forward, and suddenly all the rest was already done for them. Suddenly, grace came in, and they were allowed to go back and even more into that sense of freedom. And they got that real full taste of freedom. And part of what that freedom is of being in your true self. And when you're in your true self, they feel ecstatic. They're just walking through the waters. As it says, they saw what even the prophet Ezekiel, the great prophet of visions, could not see. And they felt jubilation, and they sang, and all their fears were far away, and they just were completely in that moment of true freedom and finally experiencing their true self. And so that first battle was won with a lot of God's grace, gave them a new life, literally through the birth canal. And so as we see, it's a moment we also seek when we're all seeking a little help from all of our bondages in Egypt, to have a moment where suddenly it's all lifted away, and then we experience that freedom. And of course, for them, it was just the beginning, because it wasn't long before that same situation would happen again and again. And they would encounter difficulty, and suddenly the sky was falling, and they'd go back to Moses and say, well, you've never done anything for us, just take us back. And suddenly again, he would be the voice in their minds of fighting those parts of themselves, and say, well, let me remind you what's happened and who you really are and what needs to happen. And maybe what happens is over these 40 years, less and less, God comes and gives them a little help to get through their fears, and they have to do that work. Through all of them, they get hungry, they get thirsty, Moses is slow to come down from the mountain, they're all by themselves, they don't know if they can really conquer the promised land, they get tired of Moses being the leader and think they should be the leaders, the manna gets unappetizing, and every time they go through this and it becomes back again, they grow a little bit more in understanding who they are and how to stay in that place. And I thought that maybe this is the same, obviously, for us as individuals, but maybe it's also the same as nations. And they had to realize as a nation who they were, that they weren't what they'd identified themselves before as a nation of slaves, of victims, but they were God's people there to bring a light unto the nations. And they had to remove all those obstacles one at a time. In their own lives, we go through this, and it seems so often that we all feel like we're challenged by the same things again and again. They keep coming back in different forms. The same inner obstacles manifest. And hopefully each time we learn a little bit more about how to overcome them, and if we go about it with sincerity. And teaching is we have help along the way. And we hope that there is also some great victories to give us moments of joy. And as a people, we also hope to touch even more on who we are. And after 2,000 years of exile, being back in our land, and facing so many difficulties, both within our own country and coming from the outside, prompting us, well, who are we and what are the obstacles in the way of us being who we really need to be? And how do we manifest that true self as a people and get rid of all the obstacles that get in the way of us being united and expressing our highest values? Whether it's in Israel since last January, for the small-mindedness and the zealotry coming from those who are in power, and throughout our diaspora communities, holding on to who we are and the thousands of years of our history and identity. And this is the greatest journey that we're all on as individuals, as a humanity, as a people. And the seventh day of Passover, and tomorrow, which is the messianic ideal that we think about, they promise us not only that there will be great victories for all of us as we go about this, great moments where we can just celebrate before we worry about the next one, but there's also one day be an end where everything will be over. The striving will be over, and there'll be peace, and there'll be joy, and there'll be a freedom that will be ours and all human beings. Chag Sameach.